Welcome to Back from the Abyss. I'm Dr. Craig Heacock. Today I'm doing a solo episode. This is called 10 Questions to Deepen Psychotherapy, Inviting the Here and Now. There are basically four main things that can happen in a typical therapy session. Number one, chit-chatting, which is reciprocal and superficial and place-holding and definitely not therapy. Number two, there and then storytelling, where the patient opens up and shares affect-laden stories and fears and thoughts and beliefs. Number three, psychoeducation, in which the therapist uses various techniques to help the patient better understand what ails them and thus move toward better coping or even healing. And finally, number four, here and now work, where the therapist and patient explore what is happening in the room and what is not happening. The transference and the countertransference, the hurts and the hopes, the acknowledged wounds, and the ones that lie just below the surface. In general, most therapists spend most of their time in the second mode, there and then storytelling, where the therapist's main role is to do what we call, quote unquote, hold the patient. That is to provide a space where the patient can share their deepest fears, wounds, and shame in a non-judgmental, kind, compassionate, affirming, and even loving space. This holding stance and space can be incredibly healing, and for some patients, holding, with maybe a little psychoeducation sprinkled in, it's really all that they need. But for our patients with deep interpersonal wounding and trauma, the holding stance with there and then storytelling is just not enough. These patients need the therapy office to become a relationship lab, a place where they can play out their old and tired and dysfunctional ways of being and relating, and then experience how poorly these play out with a therapist. And then they can begin to experiment with new ways of being in relationship, which necessarily includes learning how to hear and then work through the brave and honest and at times very painful interpersonal feedback from the therapist. Patients who struggle with pathological caretaking or narcissistic indulgence or abandonment fears or borderline pathology or expectations of emotional neglect or repetitive trauma bonding, these kinds of patients are not likely to make meaningful progress with just a holding there and then storytelling stance. They need to experience new ways of being and relating with the other person in the room, with the therapist. And this needs to happen in the here and now, in this crackling space in between. So why do therapists often avoid working in the here and now? Well, first, as the psychoanalyst Karen Marotta has described, we therapists tend to be peacemakers and helpers. We were the parentified children in our families of origin. We therapists learned at a young age how to keep the peace, how to take care of adults and others who needed our emotional stability and intelligence. And we also saw that speaking out the truth of what was happening could lead to uncomfortable or even scary consequences. Thus, we therapists as a guild, we tend to be avoidant and people-pleasing, and we can struggle to give the deeply honest and necessary and potentially life-changing interpersonal feedback that our patients need to hear. In short, we therapists often struggle mightily to say and do brave things, and working in the here and now requires us to be brave. The other reason that therapists often avoid the here and now is that we aren't quite sure how to transition out of the endless there and then storytelling and into the immediacy of the room. So with this in mind, I've come up with a list of 10 questions that I found very helpful in lighting a fire under the patient and pulling them into the space where we can actually work on the patterns that led them to come to therapy in the first place. Question number one. When you leave here after this session, what will you regret? Perhaps the most common psychological defense mechanism is avoidance. And it's completely natural to be expected that our patients are not necessarily going to volunteer to explore the most painful parts of their psyche. They may in fact unconsciously collude with us to spend their therapy minutes focusing on outside entities such as the cruel boss or the estranged parent or the substance abusing spouse. We call this the third, the person or thing that isn't in the room but can so easily capture the attention of the therapeutic dyad. We have to remember that our patients don't necessarily know what can or should happen in therapy. We need to regularly remind them of the possibilities. This question pokes at the patient with the idea that there just might be an elephant or maybe a ghost in the room that isn't being addressed. And there's a good chance that this scary thing is somehow tied up with transference or trust or guilt or shame. Question number 2. What have I done to increase your trust in me? And what have I done to decrease your trust? The foundation of the therapeutic container is trust, yet how often do we actually check the status of this critical ingredient? This question invites the patient to both speak honestly and vulnerably about the space between therapist and patient. This question asks the patient to go meta, to dig deep, to be courageous. Moreover, when we ask a question like this, we demonstrate to the patient that the relationship is in fact central to everything. And we also model asking for and receiving potentially difficult feedback. Question number 3. What is your biggest fear about us working together? I recently got back into therapy, and my new therapist asked me this very question. Now, I had to smile when I heard it because I've asked the same thing so many times. And although I didn't have an immediate response, her question catalyzed a cascade of introspection. And I'm still thinking about it 2 weeks later. This question invites vulnerability, yet also offers safety. It assumes that there is in fact fear percolating in and out of the unconscious. It posits that the therapy relationship could well stir up and even repeat past patterns of wounding and thus unhelpful coping or defenses. It asks the patient to hold the mirror up to themselves, just where it should be, if meaningful change is going to be on the agenda. Question number 4. What are you hoping that we'll never talk about? This question, which may seem sort of a lame trick at first, could actually be heard and explored on so many levels. It's the kind of question that's worth asking intermittently over time, encouraging the patient to sit with it in silence, to feel the growing dread or mounting resentment or confused agitation that this question might engender. As I sit with patients, I'm often asking myself the same question. What never comes up? What topics might I be avoiding? Probably due to my own countertransference. In what ways might I be colluding with the patient to avoid the pain and stay in the much easier light? Question number 5. When have you felt judged by me? I'm guessing most of you listeners have been in therapy at some point, and if so, you know why this question could be so powerfully connecting. Because we all fear our therapist's judgment. It's the main reason we put up our defenses and focus on the third and tell there and then stories. What would happen if the therapist actually knew us fully? How could they not find us lacking or broken or deficient or disgusting or pitiful? This question brings a core fear right out into the open, into the here and now. This core fear that others, including the therapist sitting across from us, might well judge us to be lacking in some essential way. Once we are able to describe how we feel we are being judged, then the relationship lab of therapy can begin to work through these fears and projections. Question number 6. How do you think I feel about you? Can you imagine anyone else besides a therapist asking this question? This question models to the patient that everything is fair game in the therapy space, including our typically unshared thoughts and impressions of each other. This question also introduces the concept of projection, the idea that most of us, most of the time, think that others are thinking the way that we are. And finally, after hearing and exploring the patient's projections, this question allows the therapist to share their true feelings about the patient, both the positive feelings of respect or regard or tenderness, and possibly some of the difficult countertransference material that is arising in the therapist. Question number 7. Why did you share that with me now? I had a patient last week start our session by showing me photos and videos of her beloved grandchild. This went on minutes longer than I would have expected, so I began asking myself, why this? Why now? So I asked her, as she put away her phone, I said, I'm curious why you wanted me to see these videos. She thought for a while, and then I said, I wonder if it's because you wanted me to see you experiencing joy, to know that you're capable of joy. And at that moment, she started to cry and nod. Anytime that our patients say or do something unexpected, when they reveal a secret or ask us something surprising or bring up something for the first time, it's a perfect moment to bring the session into the here and now. I wonder why now? What has changed or shifted between us so that you could say that to me? These final 3 questions were ones I heard from Hillary McBride when we did our transference training earlier this year. Thank you, Hillary. Question number 8. What are all the ways that I've hurt you? Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of the therapy relationship is that if we can build a safe enough container, then our patients will show us their issues, their wounds, their stuff. We might think of the early sessions of therapy as there and then storytelling and holding in order to build and solidify the therapeutic container, whereby the patient can then begin to manifest their pain via the mechanism of transference and thus replay their past relationship wounding with the therapist in the present moment. The most important thing that will play out in this container is the patient's core relationship wounding and the accompanying empathic failures. I often say to my patients, okay, at some point, I'm going to do or say something, or not do or not say something that's going to hurt you. And I won't mean to, but it's going to happen because of the fact that I'm human and because you have ways of being hurt that are likely to play out in our relationship. So will you promise to tell me when this happens so that we can work through it? And then typically my patient will say something like, oh, you're not going to hurt me, or no, you'll be fine. And I have to counter and say, no, I will almost surely hurt you in the same kinds of ways that you've been hurt before. The difference is that in our therapy relationship, we have the opportunity to identify these hurts. I can appropriately apologize, and then, most importantly, we can spend some time working through what happened and why you are vulnerable to these specific kinds of wounding. Question number 9. What feels unfinished between us? If only we could ask this question of all the important people in our lives, but alas, we almost never do. But in the therapy relationship, and in particular in here and now work, all questions about the relationship are game. This question tells the patients that we care about them, that we care about the quality of the relationship, and about how to make it better. This question reminds the patient that we continually need to think about speaking the unspoken. We need to explore the unexplored. Question number 10. What do you see when you look in my eyes? This last question is perhaps the ultimate transference question. It might be the best barometer of what's happening between therapist and patient. This is the kind of question that will probably need to linger, that may require an extended period of silence, or it might need to be revisited a few times before the patient has the courage to speak their experienced truth. And wow, this question requires us as therapists to be really brave. As Brené Brown has said, bravery is when we make ourselves vulnerable and we don't know how it's going to turn out, but we forge ahead anyway, ready to face whatever appears. We'll be back in 2 weeks. I again want to thank the listeners who have decided to help pay the out-of-pocket production expenses for the podcast. I've been emailing and calling you to thank you, and it's been so gratifying to hear your words and your thanks and your input. One quick anecdote. I recently called a listener who had donated $10 a month, and when I thanked her, she said, "Hey, I would have given more. I would have given $100 a month if that had been an option." That's so sweet. So thank you, Julie. That was a really lovely compliment to hear. If you too would like to help support the out-of-pocket cost of the podcast, just click on the link in the show notes. Thanks, everyone.